Okay, our first talk is by Ileana Paul and Diane Massam, A Recipe for Nullness.
Great. So thank you, organizers, for making AFLA happen, and thank you, everyone who is here. So Diane and I are going to be talking today about null arguments in recipes. So the observation that is in the literature is that in what we're going to call instructional contexts, such as recipes and instructional manuals, there's a preference for null agents and null patients. And we can see this in a recipe example as in one. So take 2 carrots, cut finely before adding to potato mixture. And what we see here is that all of these verbs are missing agents. And moreover, the verbs cut and add are missing patients. And much of the literature has focused on null definite patients in English because they tend to otherwise be ungrammatical. So we've given you some references here. But as we've just noted, the instructional context also allows null agents. Now note that we're going to use the terminology agent and patient throughout this talk rather than object and subject for reasons that will become obvious. So our working hypothesis is that the register itself, so the recipe, does not encode particular syntactic properties, but instead has certain what we're going to call pragmatic desiderata. And languages can arrive at these by different ways. So the register doesn't have a particular syntax, so we don't say that there's, say, a recipe syntax. So the questions that arise then are how do different languages meet these desiderata? And how is the relation between register and syntax mediated? Now this paper, we're going to try to answer particularly question 1, and we're going to focus on Malagasy and Niuean and also some other languages. So the organization of the talk is as follows. So we're going to start off by talking about Malagasy, and then we're going to look at agents and patients in other languages. Then we're going to focus on null patients and conclude. So Malagasy, obviously an Austronesian language, it's spoken in Madagascar, and it's well known for the voice system that advances one argument to the clause final position. And we're going to call this position the topic. So this is illustrated in 2. So let's take 2b, the verb is in what's called theme topic, therefore the patient, niaku, the chicken, is in the topic position. Now there are other, oh my goodness, sorry. There are other voices, like the theme topic also includes what's sometimes called the a passive or the intermediary voice, and we've given an example here in 3 because a lot of recipes actually use this voice. And this a passive can either advance the patient of some ditransitive verbs to the topic position, but also the location argument, as in 3. So the table is the location and it's in the topic position. Now let's look at Malagasy recipes. So just as in English, Malagasy recipes have null agents and null patients. So for A, sasan nivari, ariarutsaka ao nativilani. So in 4A, the verb is missing its agent. And then in 4B, arutsaka is missing both an agent and a patient. Now, what's important here is that these verbs are not in the imperative, unlike English recipes. Malagasy has a morphologically marked imperative form, and these are not imperatives. And these are not infinitives because Malagasy doesn't have a dedicated infinitive. Instead, what we see here is that the verbs tend to be in non-actor topic forms, so either theme topic or circumstantial topic or the a passive. So the questions when we have these null things is how are they licensed? So how do we license null agents? How do we license null patients? We're going to look at these in turn. So starting with null agents, it can be observed that agent drop in Malagasy is always possible with non-actor topic verbs, just as like English in English passive. So the by phrase is optional. So here we have just a regular theme topic verb in 5. Husurana lakumadina ni bulu, so the hair will be smeared with the pomade, so the agent here is omitted. And since, as I've said, recipes use non-actor topic forms, null agents are always going to be possible in recipes. So this is just a regular thing that happens in the grammar. Turning now to null patients, I've said before, and I'll say it again, most verbs in the recipes are in theme topic or non-actor topic forms. And in particular, in the theme topic, patient is in the topic position. Well, that's what theme topic means, right? So in 4a, we have the verb in the theme topic form. Therefore, the patient, nivari, is the topic of this clause. And therefore, as a result, in 4b, which is in the a passive, therefore the patient is, the null patient corresponds to the topic of this verb. So our claim is that the patient drop we see in recipes is topic drop. Now, topic drop has been discussed quite a bit in the literature on Malagasy. So I've given an example here in 6. So Rabé hopes that will buy car. And what Potsdam and Polinsky argue is that this empty category here is pro. And that this pro is in spec top P and it's licensed by the topic head. And the pro is identified via co-indexation with the current discourse topic. So in 6, this would be Rabé as the topic, that it's co-indexed and identifies the null topic. Now, in topic drop, when we look at it, it turns up quite a bit in text. So I've given you some examples here from stories, and the antecedent of the null topic can be something overt, just like it was in the previous sentence, but also as in 7, where we have this ring is the overt discourse topic. But it can also just be something in the discourse that's not actually mentioned in the sentence. So as in 8b, go people, take spears and kill. Okay, so here there's a null topic of kill, and its antecedent somewhere in the discourse, it's some man that's been previously mentioned. So just like we saw in text, in recipes, the antecedent to the null topic can be overt. It can be something already in the utterance itself. So 9a, chop the meat and then wash. So the meat is the overt topic that's the antecedent to the null topic. Or it can be, as in 9b, the current discourse topic, which we are going to call the object of manipulation. So when you're making a recipe, you're taking something and you're transforming it. And that's the thing that we're talking about here. Add salt to that thing that we're making. The antecedent, however, can't be a non-topic. It can't be a possessor. I'm not going to really talk about this much. It's not so important for us. And this discourse topic, the object of manipulation is always available. So even if we have an overt topic as an 11, lower the intensity of the fire and then add salt. Well, we're adding salt to, again, this object of manipulation, not to the intensity of the fire. So summing up, Malagasy recipes have null agents and null patients just like in English. And what we argue is that null agents come about due to the non-active voice morphology, because in non-active voice, agents are always optional. And the null patients are due to topic drop, which is, again, independently available in the language. All right, so we've seen what happens in Malagasy. Let's see what happens in other languages. So we're going to look at null agents, and then we'll look at null patients. So starting with null agents, we'll start with English. So English recipes use the imperative, sift the flour, and therefore the agent is null. And because of this, we think the fact that we get null agents in recipes has not been talked that much about in the literature. And the use of the imperative goes back quite a long ways, apparently, in English. And there are other languages that use the imperative, Nuayan, for example. So here in 13, we have a Nuayan example, slice and serve warm or cold. And we claim here that both of these verbs are in the imperative. Now, you might ask, how can we tell? Well, if we take a recipe and put it in the negative form, we have to use the special imperative form of negation, as in 14a. So don't peel the taro. Here we use ua, which is a special negative form that only comes up if the verb is imperative. If the verb is not, if we just have a regular declarative, as in 14b, we use the other negation. So we claim here Nuayan is like English. It uses the imperative in recipes. However, that's not the only way to get null agents. We saw with Malagasy, you can use non-active voice, and this is also what happens in Tagalog. And French and German use the infinitive, which is another form where we get null agents. So we have some different options here. And then just two more just to show you the range that we've looked at. Japanese also does not use the imperative form. Instead, it uses what's called the conclusive form. But we know that Japanese is a radical prodrop language, so we assume that the null agent comes about through prodrop. And our final example comes from Bulgarian. So in Bulgarian, recipes use middles. So dice the onion is actually something like the onion dices. And again, a middle is a construction where we have no agent. So summing up, the register tells us that the agent is the addressee, the person doing or following the recipe, and the agent is null. And then syntax takes this and operates on it in different ways depending on the language. So either by imperative, infinitive, or voice, and so forth. So there's different syntactic ways of getting this null agent. Now let's look at null patients. So again, null patients turn up in all the recipes that we've looked at. And this has mainly been a puzzle for English because null definite patients are generally ungrammatical outside of recipes. So add carrots in season, boil for about 3 minutes, that's a perfectly good recipe. But if I'm just talking to you and I say I will add carrots in season, then I'll boil for about 3 minutes, that's decidedly odd. So a lot of people have talked about this and there are different analyses out there. What they have in common is that the null element, this null patient is bound by some kind of null antecedent that is topic-like. So the question that arises is why is null topicalization possible in recipes like 20A but not in 20B? So we're going to come back to this. So how do we get null patients in other languages? Well, I've claimed that we've claimed that this is comes about through topic drop in Malagasy, and this also seems to be true in Tagalog, as argued by Malambaling. So in 21 is a Tagalog recipe example. So again, we can have topic drop in Tagalog. Japanese, so Japanese again, we can have null patients. So 22A, remove excess fat from the chicken. So we talk about the chicken, and then we can just not mention it again in 22B. We have a null patient put in tray, and we know that Japanese is a prodrop language, so we just claim that here it's an example of prodrop. Now there are other ways of, in some sense, getting at null patients, and that is through the pronominal paradigm. So in Niuean, there simply is no third person inanimate pronoun. So any such pronoun is always going to be null, whether you're in a recipe or any other kind of context. So if you want to say something like I found it, as in 23A, there is no overt pronoun that corresponds to it here. And we know that there is an argument there because we have the ergative marking, so we know we have a transitive verb here. So in a recipe like 23B, we claim here that it's simply, we have a null patient through the absence of an actual overt form that we could use. Now, even inanimates in Niuean can undergo prodrop, so we're going to come back to the question of prodrop in Niuean later in the talk. So summing up, the register tells us that the patient is the object of manipulation, this thing that we're making, and the patient is preferably null. So once we introduce it, we tend not to mention it again. And the syntax of individual languages come about this through different means, so radical prodrop or your pronominal paradigm or topic drop. And so we've come up with this table then that shows that in recipes, we have null agents and null patients, but there's different ways of getting at them. The syntax is different depending on the language you're in, which fits with our initial hypothesis that the register itself doesn't have a specific syntax. It's the languages that figure this out. Okay, but let's come back to null patients. So for null agents, it's very clear that the languages we've looked at use different syntactic resources. We can see the imperative, we can see the infinitive, we can see the non-actor topic voice. But for null patients, it also appears to be true. And this, again, it fits with our working hypothesis. However, if we look at what our claims are, we see that null topicalization turns up in different languages. So it's claimed to license patients in English and also Malagasy. So could we say that in fact null topicalization is in fact what gets us prodrop in the prodrop languages? Now, in recipes is a very clear topic, the object of manipulation, this thing that we're creating. And sort of the flip side of that, radical prodrop of objects in the literature has been related to topicalization. So Huang proposes this for Chinese, that the null object in 24 is in fact bound by a null topic in the left periphery. So perhaps we can pursue this and say that in fact all null patients are licensed by null topicalization across languages in recipes. So instead of having these various strategies, we in fact just have one strategy. Now, one thing to note here is that this null topicalization we're talking about is not the same thing as overt topicalization. So English, for example, doesn't generally allow null topicalization. So where's your ring? I've sold is odd in English, okay in German. And then the counter to that is that English uses imperatives in recipes, but topicalization is ungrammatical out of imperatives, so overt topicalization is bad. So this null topicalization we're talking about isn't the same thing. And we can see this also in Japanese. So Japanese recipes have overt topics and they have a particular function, which is to introduce new ingredients throughout the recipe. And it also has null objects, which we claim are related to null topicalization. And these are used in what's called series cohesion. So once you introduce something, if you're going to continue to talk about it, you tend to make it null. So again, overt topicalization is not the same as null topicalization. So let's look more closely at these null patients. So there's different constraints on null topics in different languages. As I've just said, Japanese null objects are used in cases of series cohesion. English, they're recovered through deixis or from the context. So a parent can point at a plate of food in front of a child and say, eat. And also, as you know, English has what we might call constructionally based null objects like tough construction. So recipes are hard to understand. So we have a null object there. Nuayan also has constraints on null topics. So prodrop of objects is possible only in specific domains. So across certain kinds of complementizers, like the causal complementizer in 30A, Tepanua died, or when or because people killed. So we have this special complementizer, and then we have a null object associated with kill, or in C comp constructions, which are common in Polynesian languages, as illustrated in 31. And so here, the completion of the event of eating is measured out by this plural participant of children. So again, eat has a null object. So summing up, patient drop has been claimed in the literature to arise due to null topicalization, and languages differ in terms of the constraint on this licensing. But the instructional context always licenses null patients via null topicalization. So this is true in all the languages we've looked at, we claim. Now there are some questions about the nature of the null element. Whoa. So is it some kind of special little NP? Is it a variable? Is it a pro? We have to look more closely at that in future work. So to conclude, a lot of the literature on instructional context tends to focus on one language and one issue, say null definite objects in English. But by looking at a lot of different languages, we see that in fact these instructional contexts all share common properties, null agents and null patients. And we can understand this functionally. The null agent, it corresponds to the reader, the person following the recipe, so we don't need to make this overt, whereas the null patient is the object of manipulation. It's very salient. But this functional account doesn't tell us how or what syntactic means a language will use. So what we've proposed is that for null agents, there are these different syntactic means to get them, but for null patients, they're all related to null topicalization. So some remaining questions: is the instructional context register actually directly providing the null topic? So does the register license a particular syntactic configuration? This is what Bender proposes. Or is the salience of the topic, the object of manipulation, so strong that it fits into every language's allowable space? If the answer to the second question is yes, then we don't need a direct link between the instructional context and syntax, and we think that's a preferable outcome. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you very much. We have 10 minutes for questions. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you comment in the chat window in Zoom, and we have enabled the chat so you can do so, and then we will call on you. Yes, I can.
Thanks.
Hello, Diane.
Hi. I wasn't able to unmute myself. So.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm just available if there are any questions.
We make you all hungry.
Yes.
It's either too late at night or too early in the morning or
Too early in the conference.
Too early in the conference.
No, so Eric has a question. Eric, can you unmute yourself?
Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi guys, thank you for the talk. So my question is a Malagasy specific one. In the English cases, I think it's clear that the null agent is you because it's an imperative. What do you think the null agent is in the Malagasy cases? Do you think it's also you or some kind of indefinite like in English passives?
So it's funny because I was just thinking about this today and I thought, oh, this is a big problem, but then I don't think it is a problem. So yes, in the English imperative, it's really clear it's you. But if we look at these other strategies that other languages use in recipes like middles, like, you know, there's no you there. So I guess I mean, maybe Diane is going to say I'm crazy, but I was thinking about this today. I was like, no, it's just someone needs to do this and maybe it's you. But we haven't looked at this, so it's a good question.
Yeah, I haven't even thought about it actually. I guess it would become you as soon as you step into the instructional domain but it isn't when the instructions are being written, it's just someone.
That's what I think. Too.
I mean, who knows if it's really you in English? I guess the reflexive shows that. Do we get reflexives in recipes? Yeah, cut the. I don't know.
Can you?
Well, you can get the ones like, you know, cut the onion yourself, but you can't have that with a null object because it becomes cut yourself. So I don't know.
So we need to try it in another language.
But you could say cut the onion, but not yourself.
I know, but I'm wondering whether it coincides with a null object.
No, but in English, it's really clear that there's a you there, right? Like there's all these famous tests that show that there's a you there. The question would be, okay, in Malagasy, does that null agent license anything, or can we show that it's what its features are syntactically? And I don't have an answer to that question.
The reason it matters whether it coincides with the null object is that it's hard to say whether you're in the recipe context register unless there is a null object, because you could also just talk, right? You don't have, the only sort of clear indication that you're in the register is if you have a null object. So that's why I was wanting it to coincide with the null object, but it's tricky. I'd have to play around with it.
But I think Lauren's example would work. Like, you know, peel the onion, cut without cutting yourself. I think sounds perfectly good to me.
We have a number of other questions. So
it doesn't have a null object.
Yeah, cut without cutting yourself. Peel the onion. No, I'm modifying her example. Peel the onion, cut without cutting yourself.
Okay. Yes, I didn't get the modification.
We have a number of other questions I want to get to. So can I ask Dan Brodkin? if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. I just had a comment about this question about the agent. So in these instructional contexts in Indonesian, there is a passive morpheme that's used that's incompatible with a second person agent, right? And so that actually is an argument for what this thing is in at least one Austronesian language. That's all. Thank you very much for the talk.
Thanks, that's great to know.
What language was that?
Just Indonesian and Malay and Java,
Indonesian.
things like that.
Okay, it just
There's
went
a
by
deep-
quickly.
Yeah,
I didn't
sorry.
catch.
Matt Pearson had a question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. This is just a very small data question, and it's also Malagasy specific, for better or worse. So you mentioned that in recipes, the non-actor topic forms are used. Is that sort of exclusive, or actor topic forms never used in recipes? So I'm thinking about situations where there might be a conflict between, say, the general preference to do topic drop in recipes versus the restriction or the apparent restriction against having indefinite topics. So if you had a recipe that had something like take some salt, for instance, where salt is indefinite, would you still be able to use the non-actor topic form there?
Well, because once you've introduced it, like if you say take some salt, add to dish, right? It's add the salt to the dish.
Right, but in the first sentence, take some salt, would you use an actor topic form there?
Oh, I see, just take some salt?
Yeah, so like when the thing being manipulated is first introduced.
Yeah, I see, I understand, sorry. I don't know. The only one, so I do know that you can have boil in the actor topic voice.
Uh-huh. This is not really directly related to your talk, but I'm just curious because there's the question of whether topics in Malagasy or you know, cross Austronesian, whether, so this might also be a question about how recipes work in Tagalog. There's this question about whether topics necessarily have to be definite or specific.
Okay.
So it's kind of the issue of how recipes work and the preference for non-actor topic voices is somewhat interesting for that question.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I can look.
Yes.
Thanks.
And isn't it also interesting then whether the agent is null in that sentence? If it's the topic,
yeah,
it would be null for a different reason, because
it would be, yeah, it would be the agent there would be the topic dropped one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that would be very interesting to see.
yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
We have a question from Sandy Chung. I can read it, or you can unmute yourself if you would like, but.
Sure, I can be unmuted, but the camera on my laptop is broken, so I can't be seen.
We can hear you.
I was wondering, some of the early lit on recipe context in English extended the observations to medicine bottle context. And I wonder what your view is about how your results might pan out in this other context.
We had that in and we took it out. Ileana will have something to say.
Oh, I know I don't have anything to say.
Oh, well,
because we took it out because
yeah,
we think that we thought that they would be the same, but now we're sort of wondering if maybe they aren't.
One of our consultants informed us just casually, I believe, this was Ileana, that the rules were different. Was it Bulgarian? The rules were different for toothpaste and things like that.
Shampoo.
So then we started wondering, you know, are they the same or are they different? And we had that in as one of our remaining questions, or, you know, outstanding questions. But we took it out because we just don't know, and we didn't really have anything to say about it. So very astute to bring up that. We don't know. Why? Do you know? Do you know something about it?
No, I think it would be fascinating to investigate.
Yeah, it would be. What was the difference, Ileana? Can you remember what the person said?
I can't remember now.
No.
And then I went on a hunt through my through my cupboard looking at, you know, medicine bottles in English and French, and yeah.
I don't think anybody's ever really looked at that. Maybe in the deep register literature, you know, where they really look at the
I
register.
have a feeling that Jerry Sadok may have had a
Sadok?
CLS paper a long time ago about this.
Okay,
Okay,
I'll do
look.
some digging.
Yeah.
I'll do some digging.
I also think that one of the differences between recipes and medicine bottles or toothpaste is that in recipes you create something.
Yes.
Right? In medicine treats something, or so does
Right.
toothpaste in a sense, right? And there some differences might emerge from that.
Yes.
That's
Because
kind
the
of why I
whole-
feel they're different. Yeah.
Yeah.
That object of manipulation is just
exactly.
there.
Objective manipulation isn't there. The thing that's ever changing through the process, but always the center of attention.